All right, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Today we are pleased to have Lynette. Lynette is a lecturer and academic advisor at Monash University. So thank you so much, Lynette, for initiating and contacting me and offering your time and expertise and support for our students at a time they really need it. So Lynette, as I said, is a lecturer. She's an award-winning educator and researcher. She specializes in doctoral education, academic identity, student well-being, AI literacy, a very important area of expertise, and research methods. So we are honored to have Lynette today, who will be talking to us about writing university assignments, a very timely and important topic for our students. So we look forward to listening to what Lynette is going to offer us today. Thank you so much, Lynette. Over to you.
That's okay. Let me share my slides and hopefully everything works. It's working. That looks promising. Okay. So hi, everyone. Nice to see you virtually. I am Lynette, as you just heard. I'm from Australia. Currently, I am originally from South Africa, actually, but I have been in Australia a long time. And this is a session that I run quite regularly. Please do feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. You can just type into the chat box if you want, or if you would like to speak, that is also fine too. So today I'm going to talk to you about the key things about how you write a good assignment at a university level, what it is that your markers are generally looking for. Now, as we begin, in Australia, it is customary to acknowledge the country of the traditional owners on the lands on which we meet. So I acknowledge the Bunurong people whose lands I am on today and pay my respects to their elders. And I also acknowledge the lands from where you are, and I acknowledge the struggle you've had for many years in trying to maintain sovereignty over your own land. And I would like to pay my respect to your consistent and very brave perseverance in the face of immense tragedy. So today I'm going to talk to you not about the first one, because one of the things that is, of course, most important in assignments is to answer the question. So the content is important, but I can't tell you what the answer is to all of your assignment questions. But what I can tell you is, in addition to the content, the things that mean the most to your marker is the argument you make, that you are able to make a claim and justify it with appropriate evidence to support the argument you are making, and that you can write in an academic style that is expected at your level, and that your assignment is clearly and logically structured so that they can follow through on the argument you are making and see why you think the way you do. So those are the things that I will be talking about today. So firstly, regardless of the type of assignment you are doing, you are likely going to follow this process. So you'll start by analyzing the question, because it's important to know what it is that you're actually supposed to do. Often assignments at university are not very simple, basic questions. They are quite long and complicated, and you have to figure out what it is that you're supposed to do. Then you will brainstorm some of the keywords. You will come up with your ideas, and you may or may not, if you have a rubric, consult the rubric that the markers have given you. Then you will go and search for the information. Usually this is through some academic databases and also, of course, your notes that you are reading. And then you will do the reading of these things. And it is often the reading and note-taking that takes the longest time for an academic assignment. So I often say that like a really good essay will take you at least 2 weeks to do. And that is not because of the writing part. It is the reading and note-taking part. That's what's going to take the most of your time if you want to do it really well. So then you have to figure out the structure. So you're creating an outline for your assignment. Then you actually get to the writing stage. So write the various parts of the assignment, make arguments, make sure everything flows together, etc. Then we recommend you have a break, preferably at least 1 day, so that you can go back and identify the errors and fix them before you submit it, because it's sad when you lose silly marks for minor mistakes that you could have easily fixed if you had just seen them, which is why we recommend having a break for at least a day. So I'm going to go through these steps today. So in terms of analyzing the question, it is important to take note of the due date and word limit. At our university, we have a 10% difference in word limit, so you can go 10% above and 10% below. I'm not exactly sure what happens in your cases, but that seems to be a fairly standard sort of university practice. And we also, if students go over or under that, or they submit late, they will lose marks. So that's why it's important to plan ahead and make sure that you're doing what it is that's expected of you. What is important to note, like I said before, is a topic is often quite complicated and it includes multiple things, instruction words like discuss, evaluate, analyze, all of which mean different things. There's also different types of assignments. An essay is different to a portfolio, is different to an oral presentation, right? The tone is also different depending on the audience that you are writing for. If you are writing for your lecturer, you will write in this academic sort of style. If you are writing for fellow educators in your education course, then you may write in a very different style. Or if you're writing a public blog post, the tone is, again, different. So you need to analyze the topic to make sure what it is that you actually are supposed to be doing. What is important to note is that university assignments are also often a bit more complex than at face value. They are wanting you to not look just at the words in the question, but also the implications of the question. So what are the actual implications of this statement that they're making in the essay topic, for example? So think about how things fit together with what you've read in or learned in your classes and how your ideas fit or don't fit with the other ideas that you may have read. So this is the basic topic I'm going to use for our session tonight. Android phones rather than iPhones should be the standard smartphones in society. Discuss. Now, this is structured in a sort of standard first-year essay statement, which is a statement followed by the instruction word discuss. Discuss quite literally means look at the evidence for and against this statement and explain to me which side of the argument you agree with more. So this assignment is actually asking you to decide whether you agree that Android phones are better or iPhones are better and explain why you think they should, that whichever one should be the standard smartphone in society. So this is an essay. The audience is therefore your marker. So you will write in an academic sort of tone for this type of assignment. Now, in terms of coming up with your ideas, there are many ways. There's no correct way to brainstorm your ideas. These are the four most common ones we usually see students use. The first one is a stream of consciousness, which is quite literally you sitting down and just writing down everything that comes to mind in your head about the topic. So here I've just gone on a bit of a ramble about what Android phones are and iPhones are. This works well because your brain tends to save information in chunks. So you'll see that the Android mobile phone paragraph is a paragraph and then the iPhone paragraph is a separate paragraph because that's how the information was in my head when I was trying to put it out. It also gives you some ideas of things that you need to investigate further. For example, the sentences with the question marks are things that I want to know more about. Also, it seems like I know a bit more about Android phones than iPhones because I wrote more about Android phones. So maybe I need to go and do some more research about iPhones. Right? So it's a good way to get you started. This is dot points. I'm sure many of you have seen dot points before. It's the same information I had before, just in a more sort of logical way. This tends to work well for people who are more logical, systematic type of thinkers because it helps you to organize and compare and contrast ideas. You can also use dot points in a more visual format. So this is, for example, you put them on some sticky notes, or if you have PowerPoint, you can put them on PowerPoint and reorganize the ideas. This is a great strategy for larger idea structure, particularly when you're trying to organize the outline of your assignment, because you can quite literally pick up and move the sticky note around until it organizes in the way that it's supposed to fit and flow logically. This is a matrix, which is quite useful for organizing arguments. And I will come back to this statement later, but you can see that it talks about who argues for this and who argues against it and what is the evidence either way. And this helps you to structure the argument in the paragraph. So you can see that there are multiple different strategies that you'll use for different purposes as you write your assignment. And of course, you can also use a mind map. As you can see from my picture, I am not a very artistic mind mappy person. It's not very pretty, but it is quite visual and colorful. And so it can help you to group ideas, particularly if you are a more visual type of. In terms of the reading, what you need to do is read good quality sources. So the argument you are making, it becomes better, the better evidence you have. So at a university level, what we require of you is to have good quality evidence, not just something that you came up with, but something that has evidence backing. So this means that we expect you to use peer-reviewed resources, which means that it is at least 2 other people in the field who have looked at this source and said, yes, this is good quality research that they've done. The better your evidence, the better your argument becomes. So things you can think about when you find something, let's say you go online just on the web browser and you search for some stuff and you get, 100,000 results and you have to try and distinguish which one is the best. It is to look for those things that are published by reputable sources, by authors who know what they're talking about, by people who don't have conflicts of interest. So for example, if there's an article that says smoking is good for you, written by people who own tobacco companies, there is a bias, a conflict of interest there. And so their evidence may not be as believable as another study that is more independent. So you're looking at the evidence that they are using to support their claims. Now, in the slides, which I understand can be shared with you later, there are links to some examples of what these sorts of sources looked like. But in general, for you, that means academic books, so physical books, but also electronic books, or individual book chapters. So sometimes you get books that are edited with multiple authors for the different chapters. So you can reference this chapter instead of the whole book. Also, journal articles that talk about research, literature review articles, which job is to look at the state of the field, the things that have been looked at and things that haven't been looked at and where there are gaps. Conceptual articles are things where there's an academic that is trying to suggest a new idea. Sorry, so they write kind of like an opinion piece with some evidence. You can use that. You can usually also use conference presentations when they are published, because the published ones are also peer-reviewed. You can, of course, also use the theses, but PhD theses are 80 to 100,000 words long. That's a very big source for your assignment. So you may want to instead look at the article the person who wrote that thesis wrote and just read the article instead for your assignment. In terms of reading, it is important to realize that you don't always have to read everything in 100% depth. So you need to have a purpose or goal in mind. Why are you reading this particular source? Are you reading this because you need to have in-depth knowledge about this topic? Or are you reading this because you need to find a definition of a key term? Because if you just need to find the definition of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, you can just skim until they talk about that and just read that little bit in detail. But if you want to have very in-depth knowledge, you have to spend a lot of time and look in-depth at the arguments and the headings and the subheadings and all these things. So have a purpose in mind before you start so you can use the right strategy. The best advice I can give you is to imagine the reading as a conversation between you and the person who wrote it, because it is. They are trying to convince you of something, and they're doing it in the way that they've put the ideas together. So if you can start to identify the argument they are making, that helps you a lot in making your reading more productive. So you can look at the way the ideas are put together, the headings and subheadings, see how the links between the different paragraphs and make notes and think about these things that you are reading and how they fit or don't fit with the other things you've read before, with the things you've learned about in your class, your own experiences, and make those connections, because that will make your reading much more productive. So one thing it's important to realize is that we are now not just expecting you to read and reproduce information. What we're wanting you to do is situate yourself and position yourself in the wider river of knowledge. So by looking at all the things and thinking more critically about the things you are reading, you are positioning yourself in the river of knowledge. Which parts do you feel fit with? Which parts do you not fit with, and why? This is because all text that is written, so if I'm writing my paper, I am writing it based on my knowledge and experience, but also based on all my social, cultural, religious, political, etc. views that have shaped the way I think. And these sorts of views are embedded in the language that I use, the arguments that I make. And then you read my article and you are interpreting it through your knowledge, expertise, social, cultural, religious, political, etc. beliefs. And that sometimes means that the arguments fit together, or sometimes means that the arguments clash. They don't work. And it is engaging in that difficulty when there are ideas that don't fit together that helps you to do that more critical thinking. So as an example, this is a paragraph from a paper that I wrote this year. And it's a nice paragraph. It used fancy words. It has nice referencing like you're expected to do. But what I want you to notice here is it makes a good argument. The argument is that academia privileges people who can write and speak nice English, and therefore people who English is not their first language, they can sometimes be marginalized, right? But in addition to my nice paragraph where I have now made an argument that you agree with because it's so well written, right? What I want you to do is actually think a little bit deeper. What are the values that have shaped this argument that I am making? What are some of the things that you can see underneath this paragraph? Some things that you may think of is the fact that this seems to indicate maybe that I have a belief that multiple languages have value, that there is a real value in diversity of ideas, that inclusion is important. This comes, for example, from the fact that I said to you at the start, I am in Australia, but I'm actually not from Australia originally, and my first language is, in fact, not English, right? So that is shaping the argument I am making here. If you can start to think a little bit more deeply about those sorts of things, you can engage with this argument now much, much more deeply and think about whether it is actually really convincing. Is it maybe biased because I, like my first language more than English or something like that? You can have that more in-depth argument with the reading, which will make the reading more interesting. You won't be that person starting at the beginning and just highlighting everything you read. You'll actually engage with the reading and start to make your own ideas about things. Because what we want you to do is move beyond just replicating ideas, but adopting more questioning stances so you can engage in that conversation with the paper and construct knowledge for yourself to think about how the ideas fit or don't fit with the ways that you think. Other things to realize is that you will often hear critical thinking is important in academic writing, right? Now, critical thinking, a lot of people know that it's important. They don't really know exactly what it means. A lot of people think it means negative thinking because critical and negative are sometimes synonyms, but it's not. Critical thinking in its essence just means you need more evidence before you agree with something. So in your previous writing, let's say at school, for example, you may have written the green bubble there, the basic what, when, where sort of questions. You summarized and described ideas, right? You need to still do that, of course, but you can't just do that. You need to move to analysis and synthesis. So this is where you look at ideas from different papers and join them together so that you can think about why and how do things happen. This is when you start seeing sentences that have multiple references in brackets, because there are multiple studies that may have shown the same thing, but in different ways. And so they've joined it together. And then we also want you to do evaluation and reflection, which is what I was talking about before. How do these ideas fit together or not fit together, and why? Do you agree with these ideas or with other ideas, and why? And explain why that matters. What are the implications of this point that you are making? Why is it important for the argument you are making? And it's important to realize that this sort of doesn't happen like one paragraph description and then another paragraph synthesis and then another paragraph evaluation. They are interwoven. So this is an example paragraph where the evaluation and reflection sentence is actually in the middle. It's a big chunk of red text, which is used to shape the argument in the paragraph, to guide the reader to what we are thinking. There is some description, which is the green sentences. You can see the second from the last sentence has 2 references in brackets. This is that synthesis sentence that I was talking about before. So it's all the things together making an argument in your writing. So questions you can ask to help you do this, because it's not something that comes naturally a lot of the time. So when you are reading, think about what the writer or thinker is assuming. So for example, if I write my paper about doctoral students and you're reading the paper, but you're working in primary schools, will my studies still be relevant to your study? Or am I assuming a certain level of knowledge for my students that your primary school students may not have? Or that I may have really fancy resources at Monash University that you may not have in your context. So what are some of those things that the writer or thinker is assuming? The learners, the time frame, the resources, the context, etc. And think whether they apply or don't to your context. Also try and think about the purpose of the writer. What are they trying to convince you of? And is that actually convincing for you? Do you agree with them at the end? Or are you like, well, I'm not really sure about that? Because then they haven't actually convinced you of their purpose. And think about how it connects or doesn't connect with the other ideas that you've read about. In terms of the actual structure of the assignment, assignments have a basic structure: introduction, body section, conclusion. This is an outline for a 2,000-word essay. So usually the introduction and the conclusion is about 10% of the word count, so 200 words each. The introduction's purpose is to provide background information. So introduce the topic, provide background information that may be necessary to understand the topic. And signposting, which is this essay will discuss A, B, and C, then discussing A, B, and C, and then in the conclusion saying this essay has discussed A, B, and C, which I know sounds very simple, but is also actually quite important now because you are writing more and more complex ideas. So the more complex your ideas, the more guidance you need to give to your reader to follow the argument you are making. This is why signposting is included right at the start of the assignment to help your marker read through. The body section is where you actually build your argument for whatever you are writing about, using those good quality sources that you've used to back up your claims and make strong arguments. And then the conclusion summarizes what you have said and possibly presents future directions for research or for future recommendations or things like that. But the main part of your assignment is your body section, where you are making your argument in paragraphs, building each claim with the evidence from the things that you are reading. Generally, an introduction starts broad and narrows to a specific point, the thing that you're going to talk about. Then you've got your various body paragraphs. You can have subheadings, but remember, subheadings are used for sections, not for paragraphs. So if you're going to use a subheading, you need at least 3 paragraphs underneath it to really warrant a subheading. Each paragraph should have one main point that it is making, which is the point you have written in the first sentence of the paragraph. And then at the end, the conclusion broadens back out to those implications, future directions, and so on. So in terms of the paragraphs, something that students often think they should do to write academically is write really complex, long sentences with lots of fancy academic words and many ideas put together. Because they feel like when they're reading all that academic work, that's what it feels like. It feels really complex and hard to understand. But actually, the harder you make your writing to understand, the less clear it is to your marker, so the less good marks you get. What you want is a clear and logically structured assignment. So a paragraph should have one point that it is making, the point of the topic sentence, which is the first sentence of the paragraph and describes the author's key argument. Each sentence should have one main idea that helps to support that topic idea. And we recommend no more than 25 words in a sentence, because otherwise your sentence is so long, people forget what you write at the start of the sentence before you get to the end of the sentence, and then it becomes hard for them to follow. And remember, when you're doing lots of editing, it is quite common to delete too many words, and you end up by accident deleting the verb or the subject of the sentence. So make sure when you are editing that a sentence has at least a subject and a verb for it to be complete. So there are many ways in which you can structure a paragraph, but we recommend the teal structure. This is because it ensures that you have everything you need to make a good quality argument. So we've already talked about the topic sentence. It's where you introduce the main point of the paragraph. Sometimes you then need an explanation sentence where you need to further clarify something that you said in the first sentence. For example, maybe you need to provide a definition of a particular technical term that you used in the topic sentence. Then you need evidence and example sentences. So these are the things from all those things you've read to support the claim, and these things are to support whatever you said in the first sentence. The examples can also sometimes include your own experiences, depending on the type of assignment it is that you are doing. And then the linking sentence purpose is mostly to link to the next paragraph so that the ideas flow logically. So how this paragraph connects to the next paragraph. As an example, I have written this paragraph for you. So you can see it starts with the orange sentence. Doctoral degrees should include content and professional skills. So this is the argument this paragraph is making. The blue sentence then has an explanation of what that term professional skills mean, because it can mean many things depending on who you ask. So I needed to clarify what I meant. The big chunk of green sentences are talking about the different ideas in the literature. Some people say this, other people say that, and here is the evidence for each side of the argument. And then the linking sentence is where I say to you, well, actually, I agree more with the people who talk about the fact that professional skills are important because, and then I talk about that implication thing I was talking about before. The skills enhance applicability of disciplinary knowledge. So by having more professional skills, they can actually make their discipline knowledge more obvious. This is a linking sentence which then links to the next paragraph, which talks about that applicability of disciplinary knowledge. So now the ideas connect together. If you write in this way, you can ensure that you have all the things you need to make a good quality academic argument. Now, I've talked to you about the physical structure of an assignment, which is, of course, very important. But what is most important is the fact that you're making an argument. So this is a claim plus evidence to support your claim. So if I sit here right now and I say, the sky is green, I claim the sky is green. Right? You're like, no, it's not, because I can see with my own eyes that the sky is in fact not green, right? I've made a claim and I have no evidence to back up my claim, and you have a lot of evidence against my claim, so you don't believe me. I could say the sky is green and reference Wikipedia. Now I have some evidence, but that evidence is not really very believable because I could have just gone to Wikipedia just before I came here and edited it to say the sky is green, right? The evidence is not very strong. I could also say the sky is green and then reference 6 famous scientific studies by Einstein and all sorts of famous people who did experiments and conclusively proved the sky is green. Now I may make you wonder why you still think the sky is blue, right? Because I've made a claim and I've got evidence to back it up, and that evidence is quite compelling. I have all these very famous people who did really impressive studies and conclusively proved it, right? This is an academic argument. My claim remained the same. I think the sky is green. The only thing that changed is the evidence that I attached to that claim. And the better the evidence, the stronger my argument became. This is why you need references for your writing. This is why you have support for your claims. So if we go back to my grid that I had at the start, I said to you this is a great way to talk about evidence for arguments. So here you can see, let's say I have decided I would like to agree with that statement I made before, Android phones are better. And one of the main points, one of my paragraphs is going to be about that they're better because their screens break less easily. So then you'll see in the middle column, I talk about who argues for this. Well, Android people argue for it, and the people who make the screens argue for it. But who argues against it? Well, Apple, probably Apple owners, they say, no, I disagree with you. My phone is just as good as your phone, right? So what evidence do I have? Well, okay, there's the people who make Android phones. They did a study and they showed some stuff that said that Android phones are better. Apple did their own study and they said, no, look, see, our phones are just as good. So now I'm like, neither piece of evidence really convinces me because both of them are pretty biased, right? Then looked at for the literature and I found another study. So then there's this other study from Smith and colleagues who did a very scientific experiment. They put phones under a machine and smashed them one after the other and discovered that no, Android phones are better. And this study was an independent study. Now I can say, okay, well, I have more evidence on the one side of the argument than the other side of the argument. So I can now make that claim that Android phones are better because I have more evidence to back it up. And then the implications at the bottom is the one that you talk about for your linking sentence. So I'll show you how to do that on the next page. But before I do, this also highlights one of the common mistakes students often make. They think, this is my topic, this is what I'm going to argue. So they go and find articles that support the claim they want to make. But they ignore all the other articles that say the opposite because they've done a biased search. What is much better is to first go and read the literature and see the evidence that's out there for all sides of the argument, and then let the evidence guide the argument you are making so that you can make a stronger argument because you have the evidence on your side. So here that paragraph is now in a paragraph format. So you can see my first sentence, Android phones are better because screens break less easily. Then I explain to you why I think the way I do. I say, well, Android phone screens are made from this glass, which has been shown to break less easily with that reference. I consider other people's opinions and points of view. I say, well, Apple says that their phones are just as good with reference to Apple reference. And then I explain why I think the way I do. But Apple's study hasn't been independently confirmed, but the Android study has. So I'm explaining to you why I agree more with the one than the other one. And then the linking sentence there says, this suggests that people who have Android phones will have to repair them less often, so therefore they are better to use in society. So I've made my argument. Now, this is a very basic argument, but it follows the exact same structure as academic arguments do. This is an academic argument that I made in a paper, and you can see topic sentence, evidence and examples. The orange sentence talks about the opposing point of view, And then the sentence after that explains what I think about this argument and how I have adapted that into my study. And then the linking sentence says, therefore, this is now the model I'm going to use. And then the next thing talks about those 4 stages. So it doesn't really matter how fancy the ideas are that you're talking about. The way you structure them remains the same. You make an argument, you showcase why you think the way you do, you consider opposing points of view, but explain why you think your argument is better than that opposing point of view. So as I talk, I'd like you to look at this paragraph. This paragraph is here for 2 reasons. One, I'm going to show you the argument in just a second, but also to demonstrate to you that you can write academically about anything. And for those of you who've probably gotten to about halfway, may have realized that this is from Harry Potter. I have written an academic paragraph based on the tale of the 3 brothers in the last Harry Potter book. What I'm doing is I'm making an argument about what I think the key moral of that story is. Now, if you have read Harry Potter, you will know that that's actually not the main point of that story. It makes a different point. But I'm an academic. I am making an argument. I think, no, this is the one that is better. I can do that. I have evidence to back you up. What I've done actually is cunningly convinced you that this is the main point of this story in the way that I've organized the ideas together. Now, if this was your actual assignment, please note that all the black sentences will have Rowling 2007 as a reference because it comes from this story directly. I didn't put it in here just for ease of access, but you remember the reference is the evidence for the sentence it's in. So if you have multiple sentences from the same place, you'll have the reference multiple times. What I've done here, though, is color-coded for you in pink, my opinion, and in black, the evidence from the source. What I have done is so seamlessly interweave my opinion with the evidence that it's come across as fact to you because I've cunningly convinced you of my opinion. This is a really strong academic argument. I talk about things that are, quite big ideas. There's some pretty interesting magic stuff happening here. And I use fancy words, but not super complex words. But it comes across as this academic argument because I have interwoven the evidence with what I think of the evidence. And that's what we're wanting you to do. Not just repeating, Harry Potter said this, but actually explaining what you think and why you think the way you do. Now, I said to you, students often try and make their writing sound really complex. You don't actually have to do that. I just wrote for you a paragraph that really doesn't have any technical terms in it, yet somehow sounded very fancy and academic. The reason for that is the things that are on the screen here. So academic English is actually not that different from everyday other English. And it is the same in most other languages. Academic writing differs in the way that they talk about things, but not the words themselves. So when they are talking about other people's work, they tend to avoid personal pronouns. So they wouldn't say, I don't think Lynette's article is very good. They will write, Lynette's article fails to consider, right? Which means the same thing, but they've just taken the personal pronoun out of it, which makes the writing sound more objective. The second thing is nominalization, which is a fancy word for using more nouns than verbs. Now, this works for 2 reasons. First, the noun is often longer than the verb, like nominalization. So it sounds fancier because it's longer. But also in languages that follow the English structure, it requires the words to be reorganized to make the sentence make sense. and this makes the writing sound more objective. And the video on the screen there has an example of a sentence that I nominalize in 3 ways. So you can see how that changes the tone and style of the writing. The other things they do is they do use formal words. These are technical words, so they do have jargon. But more importantly, they avoid everyday words and slang, and they avoid contractions like can't, don't, and won't. They write words out in full because they consider it academic laziness if you don't write the whole word. They also tend to use more cautious words. So they will say things like this suggests instead of this is always 100% true, because they understand that knowledge changes over time. As research is done, new things are discovered, knowledge may be different from what it was before. So they are a bit more tentative in the arguments they are making. Additionally, they avoid phrasal verbs in English, which is verb plus preposition like look up. They replace the 2 words with a single word that means the same thing. So instead of saying, I will look up some information, they will say, I will research, because it sounds better, because it's no longer a phrasal verb. The only other difference are the words that are underlined on this paragraph, the transition words. When you are speaking to your friends, you tend to use and, but, and because to join words, sentences together, because that's just natural. But when you are writing, you should replace those words with the more formal transition words. So additionally instead of and, for example, or however instead of but. So academic writers tend not to start sentences with and, but, or because. These are some example of words, but there are actually many, many words out there that you can use. We recommend going onto the internet and just searching for the Academic Phrase Bank. It is a publicly available website from the University of Manchester, and it has just lists of words and phrases that you can use, including lists of transition words that can be very useful to join ideas together. Please do not start every sentence with a transition word. Imagine how annoying it would be if your friend spoke to you and they said and, but, and because before every sentence they said. Those things are used to join ideas together when you're trying to build an argument, which is what's happening on the screen here. And that's the same for the academic writing. It is to help you join ideas together. Additionally, academic writers have evidence, which means they need to have references. The references are there to demonstrate academic integrity as well, which is always distinguishing between your work and the work of someone or something else. Someone else is the in-text reference from another source. Something else is there because of AI. So I don't know where your various institutions stand with the way AI is used, but at Monash, students are allowed to use it in basically any way they want, as long as it is clearly acknowledged. So the academic integrity policy for us would be in-text reference for something from a source and an acknowledgement statement at the end of the assignment for what the AIs were used for. What is important is to always distinguish between your work and the others' work in whatever way is the most appropriate in your unit. In our faculty, we use the APA 7th style, but many people use many different styles. And if you are ever writing a paper, every journal that you submit to uses a different style. So it is not so much about the formatting as it is about the actual practice of using the reference as evidence for the claims you're making. Note-taking and time management is there because if you are writing the assignment the night before it's due, you are much less likely to have time to think about these things. So you're much more likely to plagiarize by accident. It's important to remember that when you are writing, I said to you before, you need evidence to support your claims. One of the biggest misconceptions we see is the more references I have, the less voice I have in my writing. But that's not actually true. If you look at the sentences on the screen, from the left to the right, all of them say the reference says reflection is important. However, when you are, sorry, can I just ask to mute that particular person so people can hear me?
Oh, I can
There
mute
we
your
go.
microphone. I'm muted, mate. Yeah.
Thank you. So as you move from left to right of these sentences, the person who wrote them becomes less and less certain about this argument. And it's because of the underlined words. It's the reporting verbs that you use to talk about the reference that indicates your point of view. And you'll remember my example of the sky is green from before. My statement didn't change. The sky is green. All that changed is the references in brackets at the end. So the more evidence I have, actually, the stronger my argument became. It is not that you need to write sentences like, I think this, that makes your voice clear. It's how you use the sources to make your claims that makes your voice clear. Remember that the references add the support to your claims. That is the main reason you have them. Yes, if you have references, you will avoid, and you use them correctly, you will avoid plagiarism, but that's kind of as a consequence of something. It's not the main reason. The main reason is because it's the evidence for the claims you are making. It also helps others to find information for themselves. So, for example, I can read your assignment, use the in-text reference as a shortcut to the reference list, go and find the full details there, and go and find the information for myself. Additionally, it shows respect for other people's work because it probably took like 10 years of their life to write that paper. So you're just saying, good job. You can ask a question now or wait till the end. I have about 2 slides left. Remember, anything that's not entirely your own. So that is a direct quote, paraphrase, summary, idea, theory, concept, picture, map, whatever, that you did not come up with entirely as your own requires a reference. And remember, I said have a break. Please try and have good time management and planning, so much so that you can take at least a day before looking at your assignment again. Because if you're trying to proofread your assignment just after you read it, know what happens? You read what you think it says, not what it actually says. But if you step away from it and come back a bit later, you can find those small mistakes. So then you can do the editing and proofreading. Editing looks at the big picture, so thinking about the overall argument, the organization of the ideas, etc. And proofreading looks at the fine details, so spelling, punctuation, referencing, the presentation style. Did you, double space your assignment or whatever the requirement for that particular unit is? So how then do you write a good assignment at university? You answer the question, as we said before, very important, but you do this by making an argument. You use evidence to support your argument, demonstrating your understanding of the topic. You structure it strategically to guide your reader through the way you are thinking. You express yourself, but you remember that you don't need to say, I think this, to make your ideas clear. You edit and proofread your writing so that you don't lose mistakes for silly small errors. And you pay attention to the presentation style because depending on the units you are doing and your markers, you can often lose small marks even if you just formatted your document incorrectly. So everything I've said is on YouTube, so you can go and look at it again. This session has also been recorded, so hopefully you can go look at it as well. And now we have some time for questions. Before we finish, feel free to yes, and then I will also take a break. Feel free to ask your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynette. If you have any questions, guys, please come in. Ruba, you had a question. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for this great session. My question, actually, I have 2 questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
My first question is about the academic resources. Now, how can we balance our own voice with the use of academic sources without sounding either too personal or too, detached?
That's a great question. Also, complex question to answer because it is a little bit dependent on discipline. But in general, your argument comes through, your main voice comes through in your first sentence of your paragraph and in your last sentence of your paragraph, the topic sentence and the linking sentence. This is where your voice is often the strongest. Additionally, the words, the reporting verbs you use that I mentioned before, the stronger those verbs are, the stronger your argument becomes. So when you are sometimes using really strong words like marginalize or disempower or something like that, not just said, suggests, tends, that's when your voice becomes stronger. But what you want to make sure is that when you are making a claim like that, you have a lot of evidence to back it up. It's not just you thinking this by yourself, but that you do also have evidence to support it so that you're making a valid claim, not just have an opinion. So that's how I would balance it. I would focus on the topic sentences, making sure that what I'm saying is very clear and obvious, but then use the evidence to help me make sure that that is really strong and convincing to others as well. And you said you had a second question?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
my second question is that sometimes we think our argument or reasoning is solid, but it turns out to be a fallacy. What are some subtle fallacies students often miss in their academic writing? Since, I'm really interested in the logic fallacies, and I see how people fall for these, fallacies so easily when the person's writing is so good that they fall for these fallacies so easily.
Yeah, that's also a great question. There are many fallacies out there. I think the one that is probably most commonly fallen for is the red herring fallacy, where people, they're making one argument and then the other person says, but wait, what about this? Which seems relevant, but is actually completely irrelevant. They've just said it in a way that's so convincing that kind of detracts people from that other argument they were making, and they start, forgetting about this and focusing on this red herring instead. The other one that I see quite often is that biased argument I mentioned before, where they think their argument's really valid because they've got lots of evidence, but they haven't actually thought of any of the contrary evidence. They've just looked for the evidence that supports them. But then actually they may have missed heaps of other evidence that disagrees with them, but they never read it. And so they think the argument is really strong, but actually they've made a false argument because they've completely ignored all the contrary evidence. Any other questions? You're welcome. Had an interesting question. I don't know if I can really answer that because it does really depend on where ESL, or in our context is more frequently called EFL, are used. So for example, you sometimes have very I guess, grammatically focused teaching, where they will teach the actual language structure, very rigidly. Other people will use more practical activities and tasks to make them understand the theory in practical terms. Some people will do writing tasks and give a feedback multiple ways, all those sorts of things. So I think it depends on context and what works best for you. Is it Ragad?
Ragad,
You have
yes, Ragad, go ahead, please. Ask your question.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
All right. So to thank you first of all for having us in this meeting. I have a question kind of far from the topic, but it's also about writing. So if you could just give us tips to write a motivation letter if you want to apply for a scholarship abroad, I'll be so thankful. Yeah.
So they are written in a much more personal style. They are written as firstly, what motivates you to do this study that you want to go and study for example. So what is your motivation for the thing you're interested in? And then also in a kind of self-promotion sort of way, which most people find really hard to write. I know I really despise having to write those things, like I am really good because type of writing. But it often requires you to write that sort of thing. So I always recommend to my students, focus on the facts. Don't write, I am the greatest ever, I deserve the Nobel Award for chemistry. Instead, focus on things that you have evidence for, just like the arguments we were talking about before. I am an award-winning researcher in the field of X, and you can point to the several awards you have won. Then that's a good statement to make. I have achieved high scores throughout my course, in brackets, GPA 4 for my course in this thing. Then you have evidence to back up those claims. That's how I would write those sorts of things.
It's a very good question and a very good answer. Thank you, Ragad. And I think probably we can plan a session on this in the near future on how to write a personal statement, or how to apply for a scholarship, or how to write an email for the committee of a scholarship. That's a very good area. Thank you, Ragad, and thanks, Lynette. Lynette, I noticed that some of the slides that you had those hyperlinks to your YouTube channel. So if you don't mind, I would like to share the link to your YouTube channel here in the chat. So here, you guys, you can subscribe to the channel, watch the videos on the channel. You will find so many really useful stuff on writing assignments, on how to organize your time, how to improve your academic writing. So many really beneficial topics for university students and academics as well. I really like the channel. So thank you so much, Lynette.
There are more than 100 videos there. They're organized into writing assignments, doing research type studying, so like a PhD or an honors degree or something like that. So various research methods and things. AI literacy videos, English writing, and referencing. They're the main things that are there. So there's heaps of them for whichever part that you would like to learn more about.
That's awesome. That's really awesome and useful for our students. I'm sure they will make use of it. And please disseminate the link among your peers, guys. Send the link to your friends who can really benefit from the channel. Lynette, I've got a question if you don't mind. Now, most of our students are undergraduate students, and they do this practice at the undergraduate level. But do you think they will need that practice even more when they move to postgraduate studies, MA and PhD studies? I mean, can you talk to a little bit more about what to expect in the MA or PhD level if they move on and continue their postgraduate study?
So yes, you will definitely need this, and you'll need this at a higher level at the PhD stuff. So many of these slides, when I do, because I teach predominantly PhD students, so when I do my PhD workshops, I will take these slides as like the first slide in a section, and then have lots more in-depth, complex discussion about each of these things. Because the higher up you go, the deeper the skill becomes. So you still write in the same way. You'll see I use my own writing as examples. That's the writing you should aim for. It is hard to achieve if you've just started university, but as you move higher and higher, you become more and more adept at writing at that sort of level. Additionally, as you move higher up, you get less and less support most often. You are more and more independent. And so when you get to the PhD level, the only real person you see is your supervisor every 2 weeks. And so that means that you need to learn and develop these skills often by yourself through lots and lots of practice. As you get better at it, the writing becomes better. You can write those academic papers, get published in the fancy journals, end up writing your 100,000 word thesis, all those sorts of things.
It makes a lot of sense, and it's fair enough. I mean, yeah, at a higher level, you get more independent, and you get less support. So you're lucky, guys, that you still have that support surrounding you, and you have all that kind of empowerment. So please make use of it. Make use of the recording, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And before we wrap up, do you have any comments or questions, guys? Any questions? Any comments?
I had just one question, if I may.
Sure.
It was such a comprehensive session. Thank you, Lynette. Would you be able to speak more about, or rather give advice on deciding your purpose when you're reading? That's something I find so challenging, because often you're not sure exactly what you think at that point or what you might argue. So when you're starting your research and you're trying to gauge, where shall I look? What should I read? How do you start making judgments about that? Or what would your advice be about it?
So that's why I talk about brainstorming first, because it is important to have a general idea of the sorts of things you need to know more about when you go reading. So generally, when you have an assignment, it's based on some of the things that you've been talking about in your class, but at a higher level. So you have some basic information, but then you know there are things you need to go and look for. So then you have a set of things you need to know. And that is the way to shape your thinking of your reading. So set yourself some questions and tasks. What am I looking for in this reading? Sometimes it's just you are just reading generally to get an idea of what's happening in the field. Then you don't need to read every word and understand every word, right? What you need to do is skim read over the thing and get the general idea of the themes and ideas happening in the field. When you are reading for definition, you can just scan the table of contents and just go to the thing you're looking for and just read that little bit in detail. When you are reading for something because you need a really strong understanding of something, you need to read more fine. I often recommend read abstract, introduction, and discussion conclusion, and skip the methodology, particularly if you're an early on student, because the methodology is really technical and hard to understand. And the abstract will tell you what the paper's about. The introduction will give you the background information, and the discussion conclusion will tell you what they found, which is usually what you actually need to know to be able to make a good, strong argument. And then as you move up in the levels, you start learning more about research designs and things. Then you can start looking at the framework and the methodology sections and read those in more detail.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynette. That was really useful and informative.
That's okay.
I really benefited from this session. So we look forward to having you maybe in the near future again, if you don't mind. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. And thanks to, yeah, please.
For Yaya, with your question, I think I answered it before in that you can do it in many different ways. It depends on your style of teaching as well as the context that you are in.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, our students are described as EFL students because they use English as a foreign language, not as a second language. I mean, it is not used in everyday communication, not used in everyday situations. They use it as a foreign language because they are surrounded. I mean, the student body is homogeneous in terms, their first language is the same. Their communication mostly is based on Arabic, the first language. So they use English as a foreign language. We really appreciate your time and effort, Lynette. Much appreciated. Thank you so much. And I really would like to thank those students who joined us today. And please, always feel free to reach out with any questions, any suggestions for any topics that you would like to be discussed in here. And we will look forward to having you again. And we work hard to invite wonderful speakers just like Lynette to talk to you on different topics that will benefit you in your career, in your study ahead. Thank you so much, everyone, and take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.